Rachel Torres wiped down the bar at McGrath's Pub, a small establishment just outside Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. At 48 years old, she had owned this place for 5 years now, ever since her medical retirement from the army. It was a quiet life, and that suited her just fine. The pub was popular with soldiers from the base. They came for cold beer, decent burgers, and the unspoken understanding that McGrath's was a place where they could relax without judgment. Rachel treated everyone the same, privates and colonels alike. She listened when they needed to talk and kept their confidences when they needed silence. Her dark hair, now streaked with gray, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple black t-shirt, the sleeves short enough to reveal her arms. On her right forearm was a tattoo that had been there for over 20 years, a distinctive insignia rendered in black ink, surrounded by dates and coordinates that meant something only to those who knew. Most customers never asked about it. The regulars knew Rachel was former military, though she rarely discussed her service. She had a quiet authority that kept troublemakers in line and a warmth that made good soldiers feel welcome. It was Tuesday, typically a slow day. Rachel was restocking the cooler when the door opened and 6 men walked in. They moved with the unmistakable bearing of elite operators, confident, alert, radiating controlled power. Their civilian clothes were casual but their haircuts and bearings screamed special operations. Delta Force, Rachel thought immediately. She'd been around enough operators to recognize the signs. They took a large table near the back, laughing and talking among themselves. Rachel grabbed menus and walked over. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to McGrath's. What can I get you?" One of them, a muscular man in his early 30s with a cocky grin, looked up. "6 beers, whatever's cold. And menus. Coming right up." As Rachel distributed menus, the man's eyes caught on her tattoo. His expression changed, becoming sharp and suspicious. "Hey," he said, pointing at her arm. "Where'd you get that tattoo?" Rachel glanced down at it. "Got it a long time ago." "Yeah. You know what it means?" "I do." The man's jaw tightened. He exchanged looks with his teammates. "Ma'am, that's a very specific insignia. It's not something civilians should have." Rachel felt the familiar tension in her chest, the moment when her past collided with her present. "I'm aware of what it is." Another soldier leaned forward, older than the first, maybe 35. "That's a special operations insignia. Specifically, it's associated with a classified task force that operated in the early 2000s. How exactly did you come to have it on your arm?" "I served," Rachel said simply. The cocky one laughed. "You served? In that unit?" "No offense, lady, but I don't think so." "No offense taken," Rachel said, her voice level. "Your beers will be right out." She walked back to the bar, feeling their eyes on her. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned her tattoo, but it never got easier. She poured 6 beers and brought them back. As she set them down, the older soldier spoke again, his tone less aggressive but still skeptical. "Ma'am, I apologize if we're out of line, but that unit you're claiming to have served with? It was a Tier 1 asset. They didn't have women in those roles back then." "You're right," Rachel said. "They didn't have women in combat roles officially." The cocky one snorted. "So you're saying what? You were some kind of secret female operator? Come on." One of the others, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Let it go, Martinez. Maybe she's a veteran and just liked the design." "That's not how this works, Thompson," Martinez shot back. He looked at Rachel with open disdain. "You know what we call people who wear insignias they didn't earn? Stolen valor. It's offensive to everyone who actually served." Rachel took a slow breath. She'd dealt with aggressive drunks, with angry soldiers, with all manner of difficult situations in this bar. She could handle this. I understand your concern. But I earned this tattoo. Prove it, Martinez challenged. I don't have to prove anything to you, Rachel said quietly. This is my bar. You're welcome to stay and have your drinks, but this conversation is over. Martinez stood up, and Rachel noticed he was a good 6 inches taller than her 5'6" frame. It's not over. You're wearing a symbol that represents men who died, who sacrificed everything. And you're just some bartender who probably thought it looked cool. Martinez, sit down, the older soldier said. You're making a scene. I don't care, Martinez said, his voice rising. This is exactly what's wrong with civilians. They see a cool military tattoo and think they can just appropriate it. They don't know what it means. They don't know what it cost. Rachel felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept it controlled. You're right. You don't know what it cost. Because you didn't pay it. Martinez shot back. You're a bartender with a fake tattoo, pretending to be something you're not. The other soldiers were standing now, some trying to calm Martinez, others watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. Rachel stepped back, creating space. I'm going to ask you gentlemen to leave. You're welcome back another time, but right now, you need to go. Not until you admit that tattoo is bullshit, Martinez insisted. The older soldier grabbed his arm. Martinez, that's enough. We're leaving. No, Thompson. I'm sick of this stolen valor crap. Every other week there's another faker online, claiming they were special forces or a SEAL. And here's one right in front of us, with a tattoo she has no right to wear. Rachel's hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. She was angry, deeply, personally angry. This tattoo represented the hardest years of her life. It represented missions she could never discuss, friends who had died, sacrifices that remained classified even now, decades later. But she couldn't prove any of it. Her service records were sealed. The unit had officially never existed. The operations she'd conducted were still classified. I'm calling the MPs, she said, reaching for the phone behind the bar. Good, Martinez said. Let them deal with your fake ass. Before Rachel could dial, the door to the pub opened again. An older man in civilian clothes walked in, khaki pants, a button-down shirt, close-cropped gray hair. He was in his late 60s but moved with military precision. He took one look at the scene, Rachel behind the bar, the 6 Delta operators standing at the table, tension crackling in the air, and his expression hardened. What's going on here? He asked, his voice carrying command authority. Martinez turned. Sir, this is between us and the bartender. She's got stolen valor happening, and we're addressing it. The older man walked closer, and Rachel recognized him. Her breath caught. General James Harrington. Retired, but still one of the most respected special operations commanders in modern military history. He'd been a customer a few times, always polite, always low-key. She'd never mentioned that she knew who he was. Harrington looked at Rachel, then at her tattoo, then back at the soldiers. Which one of you is in charge of this group? Thompson stepped forward. I am, sir. Staff Sergeant Eric Thompson, 1st SFODD. And you're harassing my bartender because... Sir, with respect, she's wearing a tattoo that represents a classified Special Operations Task Force from the early 2000s. She claims she served with them, but that's impossible. Women weren't in those units. Harrington's expression didn't change. What's your name, Sergeant? Thompson, sir. Not you. Harrington looked at Martinez. You. The loud one. Sergeant First Class Carlos Martinez, sir. Well, Sergeant Martinez, let me tell you something about impossible. Harrington's voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. I commanded Joint Special Operations Task Force 714 from 2001 to 2004. Are you familiar with that unit? Martinez paled slightly. Yes, sir. That's the unit the tattoo represents. Correct. And during my command, we ran some of the most sensitive operations of the early war on terror. We did things that are still classified. We used assets and personnel that officially don't exist in any record. He paused. Including women. The soldiers stood frozen. Harrington walked behind the bar and stood next to Rachel. This woman served under my direct command. She conducted operations that I still can't discuss. She saved American lives. She earned that tattoo and every other commendation she received, most of which are locked in a classified vault somewhere. Rachel felt tears threatening but held them back. Her name was Captain Rachel Torres then, Harrington continued. She was one of the best intelligence operators I ever worked with. She spoke 4 languages fluently, she could blend into populations where male operators stood out, and she had the courage to walk into situations that terrified hardened Delta operators. Martinez looked like he'd been punched. Sir, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Harrington said. That was the whole point. She did her job so well that people like you never had to know she existed. She worked in the shadows so you could operate in the light. He turned to face all 6 soldiers. Now, I'm going to give you a choice. You can leave quietly, or I can make a phone call to your commander and explain how his men harassed a veteran whose service record they weren't clear to question. Thompson stepped forward immediately. Sir, we'll leave. We apologize for the misunderstanding. Don't apologize to me, Harrington said. Apologize to Captain Torres. All 6 soldiers turned to Rachel. Thompson spoke first. Ma'am, I apologize. We were out of line. The others echoed the apology, even Martinez, though his voice was barely above a whisper. Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The soldiers filed out quickly, shame written across their faces. When the door closed behind them, Rachel let out a long breath. Thank you, General. Jim, he said. I'm retired. And I should have spoken up the first time I saw that tattoo. I should have told you that I recognized it, that I remembered your service. You don't owe me anything. I owe you more than you know. He sat at the bar. Can I get a beer? And maybe you can take a break and have one with me? Rachel poured 2 beers and came around to sit beside him. Her hands were still shaking. That happens often? Harrington asked gently. Often enough. Usually I just ignore it. Today. She trailed off. Today they pushed too hard. Yeah. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Harrington said, Rachel, what are you doing tomorrow? Same thing I do every day. Running the bar. How would you feel about doing something different? Rachel looked at him questioningly. And that was when her quiet life began to change in ways she never expected. Rachel met General Harrington at a coffee shop in downtown Fayetteville the next morning. She'd barely slept, her mind racing through memories she'd buried for years. The confrontation at the bar had cracked something open inside her, old pride, old pain, old purpose. Harrington was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. Black, right? He said as she sat down. You remember. I remember a lot about the people who served under my command. Especially the ones who did exceptional work. Rachel wrapped her hands around the warm cup. What did you want to talk about, Jim? I want to offer you a job. She raised an eyebrow. I have a job. I own a bar. I know. And I'm sure it's a good life. Quiet. Safe. After what you went through, I understand wanting that. He paused. But I think you might be ready for something more. I'm not going back to active duty. I can't. Medical retirement. I'm not talking about active duty, Harrington interrupted gently. I'm talking about consulting work. Training. Sharing your expertise with a new generation of operators. Rachel set down her coffee cup. The same operators who called my service fake yesterday. Exactly those operators. Harrington leaned forward. Rachel, what happened yesterday reveals a problem. We have an entire generation of special operations personnel who don't know their own history. They don't know about the women who served in classified roles before it was officially allowed. They don't know about the intelligence operatives, the cultural advisors, the linguists who made their missions possible. That was the point. We were never supposed to be known. Times have changed. Women are officially in combat roles now. They're in special forces, in Ranger Regiment. But they're facing skepticism and resistance from men who think women can't hack it in elite units. Men who don't know that women like you were already doing the job 20 years ago. Rachel was quiet, processing. I'm working with a training program at Fort Bragg, Harrington continued. We bring in special operations units, Delta, SEALs, Rangers, for advanced training in cultural intelligence, human terrain analysis, and unconventional operations. I want you to come speak to them. Share your experience. I can't talk about classified operations. You can talk around them. You can discuss the challenges you faced, the skills you developed, the perspective you brought to missions. You can help them understand that elite operations require more than just physical strength and shooting skills. Rachel looked out the window at the morning traffic. Why me? There are other women who served in those programs. Ones who are still active, still connected. Because you have something most of them don't, distance. You've been out for 5 years. You've processed your experiences. You've built a life after service. These young operators need to see that. They need to understand that women can serve at the highest levels and come out the other side whole. I'm not sure I came out whole, Rachel said quietly. Harrington's expression softened. None of us did, Rachel. But you came out, and you built something good. That matters. She thought about the bar, about her quiet routine. Then she thought about Martinez's contemptuous voice, "You're just some bartender with a fake tattoo." When would this training start, she asked. 2 weeks. It's a 3-day course. You'd speak for a few hours, share your perspective, answer questions. If it goes well and you're interested, it could become a regular thing. What if they react like Martinez did? What if they don't believe me? They'll believe you. I'll make damn sure of it. Harrington pulled out a folder from his bag. I took the liberty of requesting some of your service record be declassified. Not the operational details, but enough to establish your credentials. It took some calls, but I have friends who owe me favors. He slid the folder across to Rachel. She opened it and saw her own face from 25 years ago, younger, harder, staring out from an official army photo. The documents showed her rank progression, her deployments, her assignments to units with names that were still partially redacted. But there was enough. Enough to prove she had been there, had done the work, had earned the right to wear that tattoo. I don't need to prove myself to anyone, Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're right. You don't, Harrington agreed. But maybe they need to see proof so they can learn. So they can do better. Rachel closed the folder. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. They talked for another hour, about the old days, about people they'd served with, some still active, some retired, some dead. It was a conversation Rachel hadn't had in years, and it felt both painful and necessary. As they stood to leave, Harrington said, "Those men yesterday, they were wrong to treat you that way. But they're not bad soldiers. They're just ignorant of history they were never taught." Maybe, Rachel said. Or maybe they're just looking for reasons to dismiss women. Some are, Harrington admitted. But most are just products of a system that kept people like you classified. We did that for good reasons, but it had consequences. Now we have a chance to fix that. Rachel drove back to her bar, her mind churning. The lunch rush would start soon. She had inventory to check, a beer delivery to receive, the normal routine of her normal life. But normal suddenly felt insufficient. That evening, as she served drinks and made small talk with customers, she kept thinking about Harrington's offer. Around 8 o'clock, the door opened and 3 people walked in, 2 men and a woman, all clearly military. The woman approached the bar. She was in her late 20s, fit and confident, with the bearing of someone who had proven herself repeatedly. "Are you Rachel Torres?" she asked. "I am. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Vance, 75th Ranger Regiment. I heard what happened here yesterday with the Delta guys." She paused. "I also heard that General Harrington verified your service. Is it true? You really served in a classified special operations unit in the early 2000s? Rachel studied her carefully. "Yes." Sarah's face broke into a smile. "That's incredible. There are rumors, stories about women who served in those roles before it was official, but nobody ever talks about it. Nobody has proof. There are reasons for that. I know. But ma'am, if you ever wanted to talk about it, even in general terms, there are a lot of women in special operations who would really benefit from hearing your story. We're fighting every day to prove we belong. Knowing that women like you were already doing this work 20 years ago, that would mean everything." Rachel felt something shift inside her. How many women are in Ranger Regiment now? Not enough, but growing. We face skepticism constantly. From men who think we can't keep up, who think standards were lowered to let us in, who think we're diversity checkboxes instead of legitimate operators. I know the feeling. I bet you do. But you had it even worse because you couldn't even acknowledge your service. Sarah paused. "Listen, I don't want to bother you at work. But if you're ever willing to talk, to share your experience, here's my number." She handed Rachel a card and left with her colleagues. Rachel looked at the card for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and texted General Harrington, "I'm in. Let's do the training." The response came immediately, "Outstanding. I'll send details tomorrow. You won't regret this." Rachel wasn't sure about that. But she was sure that hiding her service, minimizing her accomplishments, and letting people like Martinez dismiss her as a fake was no longer acceptable. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Harrington sent her materials, course outlines, attendee rosters, topics to cover. The training would focus on cultural intelligence and human terrain analysis, teaching special operations personnel how to operate effectively in complex cultural environments. Rachel would share her experience working in Middle Eastern countries where her gender had been simultaneously a liability and an asset, where she'd had to navigate cultural restrictions while gathering critical intelligence. The night before the training, Rachel stood in her bedroom looking at her old uniform. She'd kept it all these years, pressed and ready, though she'd never worn it. Medical retirement meant she could still wear the uniform for appropriate occasions. Tomorrow felt appropriate. She pressed the uniform again, polished her boots, laid out her ribbons and medals. Most of her decorations were classified, but she had enough on the public record to establish her credentials: Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, Joint Service Commendation Medal. And in a small box in her closet, she had the others. The ones with classified citations, the ones that told the real story of her service. Harrington had suggested she bring them, that he could arrange for them to be displayed with appropriate security. Rachel packed everything carefully, then tried to sleep. Memories kept her awake: missions in Afghanistan and Iraq, close calls, successes, failures, the faces of people she'd worked with, some still alive, some not. At 0600, she got up, put on her uniform, and looked at herself in the mirror. Captain Rachel Torres stared back, older now but still recognizable. "Let's go prove them wrong," she said to her reflection. The training was being held at a secure facility on Fort Bragg. Rachel showed her ID at the gate, and the young soldier checking credentials did a double take at her ribbons. "Ma'am, welcome to Bragg." She parked and walked toward the building, carrying a case with her classified medals and the folder of declassified service records. Her heart pounded. General Harrington met her at the entrance. "You look outstanding, Captain. It feels strange wearing the uniform again. It looks right on you." He guided her inside. The class is about 40 operators, Delta, SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers. I've briefed them that they'll be hearing from someone with unique experience. I haven't told them who yet. Are the men from the bar here? Two of them. Thompson and Martinez. I thought it was important they see this. Rachel took a breath. Okay. Let's do it. They walked toward the classroom, and Rachel could hear voices inside, confident, joking, the sound of elite warriors who believed they were the best. They were about to learn something new. And she was ready to teach them. The classroom fell silent when Rachel walked in behind General Harrington. 40 Special Operations personnel sat at tables arranged in a U-shape, and every eye turned to assess her. She saw the quick calculations on their faces: female, older, captain rank, ribbons that indicated combat deployments but nothing that screamed elite operator. In the back row, she spotted Staff Sergeant Thompson and Sergeant Martinez. Martinez's face went pale when he recognized her. General Harrington walked to the front of the room. "Good morning. I'm General James Harrington, retired. I commanded Joint Special Operations Task Force 714 from 2001 to 2004, and I've spent the last 40 years in special operations. I'm here today to introduce someone who's going to challenge your assumptions about what an elite operator looks like." He gestured to Rachel. "This is Captain Rachel Torres, U.S. Army, retired. She served in military intelligence for 22 years, including multiple combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. More specifically, she served in classified roles embedded with Tier 1 Special Operations units during some of the most critical phases of the War on Terror." The room remained silent, but Rachel could feel the skepticism. A female captain who claimed to have worked with Delta and SEAL teams. She'd seen this doubt before. Harrington continued. "I know some of you are skeptical. That's fine. Skepticism keeps you alive. But I'm going to ask you to listen with open minds, because Captain Torres has experience that could save your lives and make your missions more effective." He stepped aside, and Rachel moved to the front. She'd prepared remarks, but standing here in front of these warriors, she decided to deviate from the script. "I know what you're thinking," she began, her voice steady. "You're looking at me and wondering what a middle-aged female captain could possibly teach the most elite operators in the world. Some of you are thinking my presence here is political correctness run amok. A few of you are probably already dismissing everything I'm about to say." She paused, making eye contact around the room. "That's exactly the response I got 25 years ago when I first showed up at a classified special operations compound in Afghanistan. The Delta operators I was assigned to work with looked at me like I was a mistake, a liability, someone who would get them killed." Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "They weren't entirely wrong to be skeptical," Rachel continued. "I was a brand new captain, I'd never deployed before, and I was walking into an environment where women officially weren't supposed to exist. But I had skills they needed. I spoke Pashto and Dari. I understood the cultural dynamics of Afghan tribal society. And I could go places and talk to people that male operators simply couldn't access." She clicked a remote, and an image appeared on the screen, a compound in Afghanistan, clearly taken from a surveillance position. "This was my first real mission. The target was a high-value Taliban commander who was planning an attack on a NATO base. We had intelligence that he was hiding in a village where male strangers would be immediately noticed and reported. The Delta team I was attached to needed someone who could enter the village, make contact with local women, and confirm the target's location." Another image appeared, Rachel in traditional Afghan dress, her face younger, her eyes hard. "That's me, dressed as a local woman. I spent 3 days in that village, moving between households, building relationships, gathering information. The Taliban commander was there, exactly where intelligence suggested. I confirmed his location, his security patterns, and the layout of his compound. The Delta team conducted the raid, neutralized the target, and stopped an attack that would have killed dozens of NATO personnel. She paused. I tell you this not to brag, but to illustrate a point. Elite operations require more than just physical prowess and tactical skills. They require cultural understanding, language capability, and the ability to blend into environments. Sometimes, being a woman was my greatest operational asset. A hand went up. Rachel nodded at a Navy SEAL in his 30s. Ma'am, no disrespect, but how do we know this is true? How do we verify classified operations? You can't, Rachel said simply. Not completely. That's the nature of classified work. But General Harrington can verify my service record. I also have declassified documents that show my assignments, my deployments, and my clearance levels. She pulled out the folder and handed it to the SEAL. Pass it around. You'll see partially redacted orders assigning me to Task Force 714 and other classified units. You'll see deployment records. You'll see enough to establish that I was there, doing the work. As the folder circulated, Rachel continued. But here's what I really want you to understand. The military has changed. Women are officially in combat roles now, in special operations, in Ranger Regiment. Some of you work with them. Some of you are skeptical about them. But what you need to know is that women have been doing this work for decades, in unofficial and classified capacities. The only difference now is that it's acknowledged. A female soldier in the front row, a ranger with a combat patch, spoke up. Ma'am, what was the hardest part? Dealing with the enemy or dealing with your own team? Rachel smiled slightly. Honestly? Often it was dealing with my own team. The enemy underestimated me because I was a woman, which was tactically useful. But my own colleagues underestimating me, doubting my capabilities, questioning whether I belonged, that was emotionally harder. She looked directly at Martinez. Earlier this week, a soldier called my tattoo fake. He accused me of stolen valor. He said I had no right to wear the insignia of a unit I'd actually served with. That happens because our service was classified, because we were erased from official histories, because men who came after us don't even know we existed. Martinez looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I don't tell you this to shame anyone, Rachel continued. I tell you because we need to do better. When you see a woman with a combat patch or a special operations insignia, your first instinct shouldn't be skepticism. Your first question shouldn't be whether she really earned it. Give her the same presumption of legitimacy you'd give a male operator. Thompson raised his hand. Captain Torres, I was one of the soldiers at your bar. I want to apologize publicly. We were wrong, and we're sorry. Apology accepted, Sergeant, Rachel said. But more importantly, I want you to learn from it. How many other veterans have you questioned? How many women or older soldiers or people who don't look like your image of an elite operator have you dismissed? The room was silent, thoughtful. For the next 2 hours, Rachel walked them through her experiences. She talked about cultural intelligence operations, about building networks of local sources, about navigating gender dynamics in conservative societies. She discussed missions she could reference in general terms and lessons learned from operations she still couldn't fully describe. The skepticism in the room gradually transformed into engagement. Operators asked detailed questions about tactics, about cultural nuances, about how to build trust with local populations who had every reason to distrust Americans. A Green Beret asked about working in Iraq. A SEAL wanted to know about linguistic preparation. A female ranger asked how Rachel had dealt with sexism from both enemy forces and her own team. Rachel answered honestly, holding nothing back except the classified details she couldn't share. During a break, General Harrington pulled her aside. You're doing great. They're listening. They're starting to listen, Rachel corrected. Some of them still doubt. Let me show them something that might help. When the class reconvened, Harrington stood beside Rachel. I want to show you something that's been declassified specifically for this training. Captain Torres, may I? Rachel nodded, though her heart raced. She knew what he was about to reveal. Harrington clicked the remote, and an image appeared, an award citation with the Department of Defense seal. This is Captain Torres's Silver Star citation, Harrington said. It was classified for 20 years because the operation it describes was classified. It's been partially declassified now. The room went completely still. The Silver Star was the third highest military decoration for valor. Harrington read aloud. Captain Rachel Torres is awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States while serving with Joint Special Operations Task Force 714 in Afghanistan. On November 12, 2003, Captain Torres was operating as a cultural advisor embedded with a Delta Force team conducting a high-value target raid. When the team came under heavy fire and sustained casualties, Captain Torres, despite having no formal combat arms training, provided first aid under fire, helped coordinate the medical evacuation, and maintained contact with Afghan sources who provided critical intelligence that allowed the team to complete the mission. Her actions saved the lives of multiple American operators and ensured mission success. The silence in the room was profound. That's not all, Harrington continued. He clicked to another slide. Captain Torres also received 2 Bronze Stars with V device for valor, a Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, and multiple classified commendations that I still can't discuss. He brought out the case Rachel had brought, the one with her classified medals. Under Harrington's supervision, he opened it to reveal decorations that most of the room had never seen before. These medals represent operations that are still classified, Harrington said. They represent a level of service that goes beyond what any of you can verify. But I can verify it. I was there. I commanded those operations. And I'm telling you that Captain Rachel Torres is one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to serve with. He turned to face the class. Now, knowing all this, who here still questions whether she earned the tattoo on her arm? Who still thinks she's faking her service? No one moved. Good, Harrington said. Because here's the thing, you shouldn't have needed to see these medals to respect her service. You should have given her the benefit of the doubt from the beginning. You should have recognized that people who serve in the shadows, whose work is classified, whose contributions are erased from official records, deserve your respect even when they can't prove their service with a neat stack of public documents. He let that sink in, then continued. There are thousands of veterans like Captain Torres. Intelligence operatives, linguists, cultural advisors, women who served in combat roles before it was officially allowed. They did the work, paid the price, and then came home to civilian life where nobody knows what they did. Some of them have been accused of stolen valor, dismissed as fakers, mocked for wearing insignias they legitimately earned. That's unacceptable. Martinez stood up. Sir, Captain Torres, I need to say something. Rachel nodded for him to continue. I was wrong, Martinez said, his voice rough with emotion. Not just about you specifically, but about my whole attitude. I've been so focused on protecting the honor of special operations that I forgot that honor includes people whose service I don't know about, whose contributions I can't see. I'm sorry. And I commit to doing better. Several other operators nodded in agreement. A female Army officer stood. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Vance. We met at your bar the other night. Rachel smiled. I remember. I just want to say, on behalf of every woman in this room and every woman trying to make it in special operations, thank you. Thank you for paving the way. Thank you for doing the work when it was even harder than it is now. And thank you for being willing to share your story. The room broke into applause. It started with the women, then spread to the men, until everyone was standing, clapping. Rachel felt tears threaten but held them back. She'd been a soldier too long to cry in front of troops. When the applause finally died down, she said simply, "Thank you. Now let's get back to work. You've got a lot to learn, and we're just getting started." For the rest of the day, Rachel taught them everything she could about cultural intelligence, about operating in complex human terrain, about the skills that made the difference between mission success and failure. And they listened like their lives depended on it. Because they did. The 3-day training course continued with an intensity Rachel hadn't experienced since her active duty days. The operators asked hard questions, challenged her assumptions, and pushed for specific tactical applications of the cultural intelligence principles she taught. On day 2, Rachel brought in 2 former colleagues who had also served in classified roles, a male Army linguist who had worked with special forces throughout the Middle East, and a female Air Force intelligence officer who had coordinated drone operations. Together, they provided a comprehensive picture of how intelligence and cultural understanding enabled special operations success. During a break, Lieutenant Sarah Vance approached Rachel with 3 other female operators. "Ma'am, we wanted to ask you something," Sarah said. "The 4 of us are all in special operations roles. I'm Ranger Regiment, Captain Lee here is a Navy SEAL, and Lieutenants Jackson and Rodriguez are both Green Berets. We face skepticism constantly, from both outside and inside our units. Do you have any advice on dealing with that?" Rachel gestured for them to sit. "The skepticism won't disappear overnight. Even with all the progress, even with official integration, you'll still encounter men who doubt you. Here's what I learned: don't waste energy trying to convince skeptics with words. Convince them with performance." "We've been doing that," Captain Lee said. "I'm top of my class in every qualification. Doesn't seem to matter to some people." "You're right, it doesn't matter to some people. They'll never accept you no matter what you do." Rachel paused. "But there's a difference between the genuinely biased and the cautiously skeptical. The biased will never change their minds. The skeptical can be won over, but it takes time and consistency. How do we tell the difference?" Lieutenant Jackson asked. "The skeptical will give you a chance to prove yourself. They'll watch, evaluate, and gradually come around when you demonstrate competence. The biased will move the goalposts. You'll meet their standards, and they'll claim the standards were lowered. You'll outperform male peers, and they'll say you had advantages. You can't win with them. So what do we do about the biased ones?" Sarah asked. "Document everything. Build alliances with fair-minded leaders. And frankly, outlast them. The military is changing, slowly but steadily. The biased ones are losing ground. Your job is to be so undeniably competent that even neutral observers can see you belong." Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up. "Ma'am, did you ever have moments where you almost quit? Where the resistance seemed like too much?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Yes. Particularly after an operation in Iraq in 2005. We just completed a successful mission. My intelligence had led to the capture of an IED cell that had killed several American soldiers. It was good work, solid intelligence, lives saved." She paused, the memory still painful. "Afterward, I overheard 2 of the Delta operators I'd been supporting. One said the intelligence had been obvious, that anyone could have developed it. The other said they didn't understand why they needed a female intel officer anyway, that it was probably just political pressure from Washington." "What did you do?" Captain Lee asked. "I considered requesting a transfer. I was tired of proving myself over and over. But then the team leader, a master sergeant who'd been skeptical of me at first, called a meeting. He told the entire team that my intelligence work had been exceptional, that I'd developed sources and insights that male operators couldn't have accessed, and that anyone who had a problem with my gender could take it up with him." Rachel smiled slightly. "He didn't do it because he particularly liked me. He did it because he was a professional who recognized good work. That's what you need to find, professional leaders who care more about mission success than their own biases." Did those two operators ever apologize? Sarah asked. One did, eventually. The other never spoke to me again unless required by duty. But here's the thing, I didn't need his approval. I needed to know I was doing good work, that I was contributing to the mission, that I was saving lives. That was enough. The four women sat thoughtfully. Then Captain Lee said, "Thank you, ma'am. It helps knowing that someone went through this before us, that we're not alone." "You're definitely not alone," Rachel assured them. "There are dozens of women who served in the shadows before official integration. Most of us have been quiet about it, but maybe it's time to be louder. You deserve to know your history." That evening, General Harrington invited Rachel to dinner at the Fort Bragg Officers Club. As they ate, he said, "You're having an impact. I've heard from several of the attendees. They're thinking differently about female operators, about classified service, about their own assumptions." "That's good," Rachel said. "But 3 days of training won't undo decades of bias." "No, but it's a start. Which is why I want to talk to you about expanding this." Harrington leaned forward. "I've been in contact with Special Operations Command. They want to develop a comprehensive cultural intelligence program. They need someone to lead curriculum development, recruit instructors, and oversee training delivery." Rachel set down her fork. "Jim, I'm not qualified for that. I'm a retired captain who runs a bar. You're a retired captain with 22 years of experience in exactly the field they need. And you've proven over the last 2 days that you can teach this material effectively." He paused. "They're offering a civilian contractor position. Good pay, flexible schedule, meaningful work. You'd be based here at Bragg but could still run your bar if you wanted to keep it." "Why me?" "There are active duty officers who could do this. Because you have something they don't, credibility born from experience that predates official integration. You can speak to the old guard and the new generation. You've lived through the transition. That's invaluable." Rachel thought about her bar, her quiet life, the routine she'd built. Then she thought about Lieutenant Vance and the other female operators, about the skepticism they faced, about the history that needed to be told. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But Rachel, you're already making a difference. Why not make it bigger?" On the third and final day of training, Rachel led a practical exercise. The operators were divided into teams and given a scenario. They needed to gather intelligence in a simulated Afghan village where the male inhabitants were hostile to American military presence. Teams with female operators quickly realized they could leverage their female members to make contact with village women, who had access to information the men wouldn't share with Americans. Teams without female operators struggled, trying various tactical approaches that fell short because they couldn't access half the population. During the debrief, a Delta operator who'd been particularly skeptical on day 1 raised his hand. "Ma'am, this exercise was eye-opening. I've done 3 deployments to Afghanistan, and we always struggled to get good human intelligence from villages. I never really thought about how much we were missing by not being able to talk to women." "That's exactly the point," Rachel said. "Elite operations aren't just about tactical skills. They're about understanding the human terrain, accessing all available sources of information, and leveraging every asset you have. Gender, language, cultural knowledge, these are all operational tools." Martinez spoke up. "Ma'am, I have a question that's been bothering me. At your bar, I said some pretty awful things. But you stayed calm, professional. How? I'd have thrown me out immediately." Rachel smiled. "I wanted to. But I learned a long time ago that anger often comes from ignorance, not malice. You didn't know my story because it was classified. You were trying to protect the honor of a unit you respected. Your approach was wrong, but your motivation wasn't entirely bad. Still, I was out of line." "Yes, you were. But you've learned from it. That's what matters." Rachel paused. "And honestly, your reaction helped me realize something. If elite operators don't know about the women who served in classified roles before official integration, whose fault is that? We stayed silent, we kept our secrets, we faded into civilian life without telling our stories. Maybe it's time we spoke up. After the final session, Harrington presented Rachel with a plaque, a simple acknowledgement of her contribution to the training. But more meaningfully, every operator in the class lined up to shake her hand and thank her personally. Thompson approached with Martinez. "Ma'am, we wanted to ask if we could visit your bar again. Pay properly for the beers we didn't drink last time. Show proper respect." "You're welcome anytime," Rachel said. "First round is on the house." Sarah Vance was one of the last in line. "Ma'am, I hope you take the job General Harrington offered. We need more instructors like you. People who've actually done the work, who can teach from experience, who can help change the culture." "I'm considering it," Rachel admitted. "Please do. You have no idea how much it means to have someone like you in our corner." As Rachel packed up her materials and prepared to leave, Harrington walked her to her car. "So?" he asked. "What are you thinking about the job offer?" Rachel looked back at the building where she'd just spent 3 days teaching some of the most elite warriors in the world. "I'm thinking that maybe my fight isn't over. Maybe running a bar and tending a garden isn't enough. Maybe I have more to contribute." "Is that a yes?" "It's a strong maybe." She smiled. "I need to think about logistics, about what it means for my life, about whether I'm really ready to be this visible after years of being invisible." "Fair enough. But Rachel, I've seen you work this week. You're a natural teacher. You're changing minds and building bridges. That's important work." "I'll give you an answer by next week," Rachel promised. She drove home to Fayetteville, her mind churning with possibilities. The bar was quiet when she arrived. It was early afternoon, before the evening rush. She poured herself a coffee and sat at the bar, looking at the tattoo on her arm. For years, this tattoo had been a private reminder of service that couldn't be acknowledged. It had brought her pride and pain, had been questioned and mocked, had marked her as something she couldn't prove. Now it felt different. It felt like a responsibility, to the women who had served before her in even more difficult circumstances, to the women serving now who faced continued skepticism, to the history that deserved to be told. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Captain Torres, this is Major Lisa Chen, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. General Harrington gave me your number. I commanded a female engagement team in Afghanistan in 2010. I heard about your training this week. I'd love to talk to you about my experiences and how we can work together to document this history. Please call when you can." Rachel stared at the message. Another voice from the shadows, another story that deserved to be told. Then another text, this one from a retired CIA officer who had worked with Rachel in Iraq. "Heard you're coming out of the shadows. About time. Let's talk." And another, from a former Navy linguist who had embedded with SEAL teams. Her quiet life was officially over. And maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. Rachel picked up her phone and texted General Harrington, "I'm in. Let's talk about the details." His response came immediately, "Outstanding. Welcome back to the fight, Captain." Rachel smiled and looked around her bar. She'd keep it, but it would no longer be her whole identity. She was more than a bartender. She was Captain Rachel Torres, and she had stories to tell, history to preserve, and a new generation to teach. The shadows were calling her back. But this time, she'd walk in them by choice, not by necessity. And she'd make damn sure that the women who came after her wouldn't have to hide in those shadows at all. Part 5. 3 months later, Rachel stood in a conference room at Fort Bragg, surrounded by maps, photographs, and declassified documents spread across multiple tables. She was part of a team now, 5 other veterans who had served in classified roles before women were officially integrated into special operations. Major Lisa Chen, the Army officer who had first reached out, became Rachel's closest collaborator. Together with two former CIA officers, a retired Air Force intelligence analyst, and a former Marine cultural advisor, they were building something unprecedented, a comprehensive curriculum on cultural intelligence that incorporated lessons from 2 decades of classified female service. "We need to be careful about what we reveal," Major Chen said during their morning planning session. "Some operations are still classified and always will be." "Agreed," Rachel said. "But we can talk about general principles, about the cultural dynamics we navigated, about the skills we developed. We can teach the lessons without compromising sources and methods." One of the CIA officers, a woman named Patricia Owens who had operated throughout the Middle East, spoke up. "I've been thinking about how to frame this. It's not just about women in special operations. It's about expanding the toolkit for all operators. Cultural intelligence, language skills, human terrain mapping, these capabilities make everyone more effective." "That's exactly right," Rachel agreed. "If we make this about women versus men, we lose half our audience. If we make it about mission effectiveness and operational capability, everyone benefits." Over the following weeks, they developed a multi-tiered training program. Basic modules for all special operations personnel covered cultural intelligence fundamentals. Advanced courses went deeper into specific regions and operational contexts. And a specialized instructor course prepared current female operators to teach these skills to others. The program launched officially in January with a pilot course for a mixed group of 40 operators from across Special Operations Command. Rachel stood before them on the first day, no longer nervous, no longer uncertain of her place. "Welcome to Advanced Cultural Intelligence for Special Operations," she began. "Over the next 2 weeks, you're going to learn skills that will make you more effective operators, help you build better relationships with local populations, and potentially save your life or the lives of your teammates." She clicked a remote, and an image appeared, a group of soldiers, male and female, working alongside Afghan village elders. This is the future of special operations. Not just the tip of the spear, but the whole spear, kinetic operations supported by intelligence, cultural understanding, and local partnerships. You're already the best tactical operators in the world. We're here to make you better strategic operators. The 2 weeks were intense. Rachel and her team taught everything from cultural anthropology to practical language skills, from gender dynamics in conservative societies to building and managing local source networks. Guest speakers included commanders who had led joint operations, interpreters who had risked their lives working with American forces, and even former adversaries who could explain how they had viewed American operations. Martinez and Thompson were in this class, having specifically requested to attend. On the 4th day, during a break, Martinez approached Rachel. "Ma'am, I want you to know that confrontation at your bar changed my life. I'd been so arrogant, so sure that my way of operating was the only way. This course has opened my eyes to everything I've been missing. I'm glad you're here, Martinez. You're one of the most engaged students in the class. I have a lot to make up for." He paused. "I've also been thinking about something you said during the first training, about how anger often comes from ignorance. I was ignorant, and I lashed out. I want to make sure I never do that again, to you or anyone else. The fact that you're aware of it means you've already changed," Rachel said. "Now pay it forward. When you see other operators making the same mistakes, help educate them." The program's reputation grew quickly. Commanders from multiple units requested the training. Special Operations Command asked Rachel's team to develop an online version for deployed personnel who couldn't attend in person. Media attention followed, though Rachel tried to avoid it. A reporter from the military newspaper Stars and Stripes tracked her down, asking for an interview about women in classified special operations roles. She agreed, with General Harrington's blessing and a thorough security review of what she could discuss. The resulting article, titled "The Invisible Warriors, Women Who Served in Special Operations Before It Was Official," created a stir. Other women who had served in classified roles reached out, sharing their stories, wanting to contribute to the historical record. Rachel found herself at the center of an unexpected movement, preserving and honoring a history that had been deliberately erased for operational security but now deserved to be acknowledged. The VFW post in Fayetteville asked her to speak at their Veterans Day ceremony. She agreed, and found herself on a stage before hundreds of people, many of them veterans, many of them skeptical about women in combat. "I'm going to tell you about a soldier named Jennifer Watts," Rachel began. In 2004, Jennifer was a cultural advisor embedded with a special operations team in Iraq. She spoke fluent Arabic, understood tribal dynamics, and could navigate the complex cultural landscape in ways that male operators couldn't. The audience listened intently. During an operation to capture an insurgent leader, the team encountered an unexpected obstacle, a compound full of women and children being used as human shields. Male operators couldn't enter certain areas of the compound without violating cultural norms so severely that it would have compromised the entire mission and endangered future operations. Rachel paused. Jennifer went in. She moved through the women's quarters, calmed frightened families, gathered intelligence, and identified which women were willing to provide information. Because of her work, the team successfully captured the target without civilian casualties and gathered intelligence that led to multiple follow-on operations. Jennifer Watts died 6 months later when her convoy hit an IED. She was 26 years old. Her family was told she was a translator. They were never told about her actual role, about the operations she enabled, about the lives she saved. Her service was classified, her contributions erased from the public record. The crowd was silent. There are dozens of women like Jennifer. Soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors, and civilian intelligence officers who served in combat zones in classified roles before women were officially allowed in those positions. They took the same risks, faced the same dangers, and made the same sacrifices as their male counterparts. But their stories were never told. Rachel's voice strengthened. Until now. It's time we acknowledge this history. It's time we honor these women. And it's time we stop being surprised when women prove they can serve at the highest levels of military operations, because they've been doing it for decades. The applause was thunderous. After her speech, dozens of people waited in line to shake her hand. Veterans thanked her for her service. Young women asked how they could follow in her footsteps. Parents of female soldiers expressed gratitude that their daughters had role models. An older veteran, wearing a Vietnam-era ball cap, approached with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, I spent 40 years thinking women didn't belong in combat. I was wrong. Thank you for educating this old soldier." That night, Rachel returned to her bar. She'd hired a manager to run it during her frequent absences, but she still came in several nights a week to work behind the bar, to maintain that connection to her quiet life. Lieutenant Vance came in with several other female operators. They'd become regulars, treating McGrath's Pub as an unofficial gathering place for women in special operations. "I heard your speech today was incredible," Sarah said. "It's already circulating on social media. Is that good or bad?" Rachel asked, pulling beers. "Good. People need to hear it. Especially young women who are thinking about military service but aren't sure they'll be accepted." A young woman sitting at the bar, clearly not military, spoke up. "Excuse me, are you Captain Torres? The one from the article?" "I am. I'm a junior at UNC. I'm considering joining ROTC, but I'm worried about sexism in the military. Hearing your story, knowing that women like you have been serving successfully for decades, it makes me think I could actually do it." Rachel poured her a soda and sat across from her. "The military isn't perfect. You'll face challenges, including sexism. But it's also filled with professional people who care about mission success more than gender. And it's changing for the better. If you want to serve, don't let fear of sexism stop you." They talked for an hour about military service, about what to expect, about how to prepare. When the young woman finally left, she had Sarah Vance's phone number and a commitment to visit an ROTC program. Around 11 p.m., when the bar was nearly empty, Rachel was wiping down tables when two men in suits walked in. They had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. "Captain Torres?" one asked, showing FBI credentials. Rachel's guard went up immediately. "Yes. We're not here about anything bad," he assured her quickly. "I'm Special Agent Williams from the FBI's History Office. We're conducting a project to document the history of women in federal law enforcement and military service. General Harrington suggested we talk to you." "About what specifically?" "About your experiences working with the FBI's Counterterrorism Division during your deployments. We have records showing you provided critical support to several joint operations, but the details are still classified. We're hoping to declassify some of that history and give proper credit to the women who contributed." Rachel sat down with them, and they talked until closing time. It was the same conversation she'd been having in various forms for months, about service that had been classified, about contributions that had been erased, about a history that deserved to be preserved. When they finally left, Rachel locked up the bar and sat alone in the darkness, looking at the tattoo on her arm. So much had changed since that confrontation with Martinez. Her quiet life had become anything but quiet. Her phone buzzed. A text from General Harrington: "Just got off the phone with the commander of Special Operations Command. Your program is being expanded to all Special Operations training. You did it, Rachel. You're changing the culture." Rachel smiled and typed back, "We did it. This was always bigger than one person. Still, you led the charge. Proud of you, Captain." She looked around her bar, at the pictures on the walls of Fort Bragg units, at the American flag in the corner, at the place she'd built as a refuge from her past. It wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a headquarters, a gathering place, a symbol of how veterans could transition from service to civilian life while still maintaining their identity and contributing to the community. The door opened, surprising her. Martinez walked in, looking sheepish. "I know you're closed, ma'am. I just wanted to drop something off." He handed her a framed photograph. It showed the entire class from her first training course, 40 operators standing at attention. In the center, front and center, was Rachel. At the bottom, everyone had signed their names. Next to his signature, Martinez had written, "Thank you for teaching us what we should have already known. You made us better operators and better people." Rachel felt tears threatening. "Thank you, Martinez. This means a lot. You changed my life, ma'am. I'll never forget that." He paused. "Also, I submitted paperwork to become an instructor for your cultural intelligence program. If you'll have me, we'd be honored to have you." After he left, Rachel hung the photograph behind the bar, right next to her other memories and medals. She thought about that first confrontation, about being called a fake, about the humiliation and anger she'd felt. And she thought about how that moment had catalyzed everything that followed: the training program, the curriculum development, the historical documentation, the cultural change. Sometimes, she reflected, injustice was the spark that ignited necessary change. Her phone rang. It was late, after midnight, but when she saw the caller ID, Patricia Russo, Captain Jennifer Russo's mother, she answered immediately. "Patricia, is everything okay?"